This lecture is on Surah Baqarah, second surah of the Qur'an. I hope to cover verses 1 through 5. So, verse 1 is Alif Lam Mim, which is simply the three letters of the Arabic alphabet. Verse 2, Dhalika al-Kitab, this is the book. La reba fihi, no doubt in it. Hudan lil muttaqin, a guidance for the muttaqin, and that's a term I'll try to define later. Next verse. Alladhina yu'minun bil ghab, those who believe in the unseen. Wa yukimun al swalat, and who stand in swalat, another term I'll try to define later. Wa mimma rizaqnahum yunfikun, and from what we have provided them, they spend. Next verse. Waladina yu'minun bima unzela alayka, and those who believe in what was sent down to you. Wama unzela min qablika, and was sent down before you. Wa bil akhirati hum yukinun, and in the hereafter they firmly believe. Next verse. Ulaika ala hudan min rabbihim, those are on a guidance from their Lord. Wa ulaika hum al-muflihun, and those, they are the successful. So that's verses 1 through 5 of Baqarah, second surah of the Quran. Baqarah simply means cow, and that of course comes up later in the surah. So I'll talk a bit about each of these verses. I'm going to pass over verse 1 because it's something that is not known. The meaning of these letters, Alif Lam Mim, why they're put at the beginning of this surah, is not known. It's a big subject, which I'm not going to get into. Verse 2, this is the book, no doubt in it, a guidance for those who defend, well, for the muttaqin. That's the main term that I wanted to discuss. But first, that first clause, this is the book. No doubt in it. So, as we might expect, Baqarah, which is the longest surah of the Quran, and coming after the first just 7-verse long surah, Fatiha, begins by describing the book that we have before us. And it's telling us right from the start that this book is to be trusted completely. And when it goes on to say, it is not that it gives guidance, not that it provides guidance, but it is a guidance, hudan. It's further emphasizing that this is not like other books. Its identity is that it is a guidance. And at other places it's called a mercy or a blessing. So the book itself has miraculous powers to guide. And it has the miraculous property of being without any doubt. So when we read this book, we are supposed to completely not suspend critical thinking, not suspend thought. Obviously, that would make no sense. The book is asking us again and again to reason and to think and reflect. But to consider as well as we can that nothing that we're being told here is untrue. That it's not something coming from, it's not speculation, it's not coming from a human mind, but coming from God himself. So we can doubt our ability to understand, we can doubt the translations, the commentaries, interpretations, we can doubt our own interpretation, but we have to trust that the words of this book, insofar as we can understand them, are telling the literal truth. The other thing I want to talk about in this verse is that it, as far as I can tell, is imposing a condition on we readers of the Qur'an, because it says it is a guidance. It doesn't just end there, it's not a period there, but a guidance for the muttaqin, which implicitly is suggesting that it is not a guidance for anyone else. So of course the next question is, well, what is the muttaqin? Because unless we belong to that group of people, then this book cannot be a guidance for us. At least that's how I understand this verse. Well, the standard translation of muttaqin is, it varies, but is the righteous, or the God conscious, or the God fearing. Well, the root of the word muttaqin is, at least one other form of that word is itaku, which is a command that's written elsewhere in the Quran. And so it often says itaku or itaku Allah. And itaku is often translated as fear. So that's why we get this muttaqin would be the God-fearing. But if you look up in Arabic dictionaries, what does this word itaku mean? Well, its more literal translation would be defend or protect. And it's even related to another word which would just be, I think, waqi, and that appears in the Quran as well, but in a different context where it was be asking God, save us, protect us. Okay. And there's even a verse where it describes, I think, people in hell trying to shield their faces or walk. I think it's even itaku there, but or yutaku, some form of it, shielding their faces from the fire. So it has to do with protection, defense. I would propose that rather than say the muttaqin or the God-fearing or the God-conscious, which are kind of compromises, those are not literal translations, but an attempt at approximating what is meant, can we rather use the literal meaning as far, to at least some extent, and say that this is saying it is a guidance for those who defend, those who are trying to defend themselves, protect themselves. And as often in the Quran, it's left implicit what the thing is that they're defending themselves from. But I think the implication would be from evil, from Satan, from harm, or maybe, and from hell, or from all of those, really. So perhaps the thing is not specified because it's a large category of things. So if that's accurate at all, then I think what it's saying here in verse 2 is that this book is guidance for those who are seeking guidance. I mean, that's logical, right? Or those who realize that there is a danger that we are all susceptible to, and we can call that by different names, but we can say just simply evil or harm, or we could specify that it's hell or damnation. And so for those who, from all different walks of life, whoever it might be, from any different religious background, cultural background, but those who recognize the danger and who are trying to do something about it to protect themselves, this book is for you. You may not have even begun to read it yet. This might be your first exposure, but it's for you insofar as you are looking to help yourself, protect yourself. Now, as we look at the other verses in this passage, I think that they're adding further conditions. It's not enough just to be defending yourself, because the next verse goes on to say, those who believe in the unseen. And it'll go on, but we'll talk first about believe in the unseen. Fairly straightforward, but I just want to note that it's this term unseen, rab, appears in obviously a lot of other passages in the Quran, specifically later in the same surah, around verse 30, and after 30, there's a long passage where God informs the angels, I am going to create basically mankind, humankind, and they'll be my representative, my khalifatan on earth. And the angels are very surprised. And even to an extent, they balk at this decision of God's and say, why would you want one who sheds blood and spreads corruption to represent you? Because the nature of this new creation of God, the angels somehow knew human nature. And I'm not going to read the whole passage, but God shows them their error by asking Adam, who of course in the Quran as well as in the Bible is the first human, to inform the angels about the names of things, which they themselves had to confess, we do not know what the names of these things are. But God had given Adam that knowledge. And when Adam impressed the angels with his knowledge of these names, God says to them, did I not tell you that I know what you do not know? So this was a lesson for the angels, and I think it's related to us early in Baqarah, because it's meant to be a lesson to us as well, that very simply, we do not know what God knows. And unless we can accept that our knowledge is incomplete, then this book cannot be a guidance for us. It seems like a fairly simple, easy condition. Most people are happy to accept that they do not know everything. But that might be part of the problem, that we think that we satisfy this condition. We think that we accept and are humble and accept that we don't know everything. But really, deep down, we, in one way or another, don't really acknowledge our shortcomings in terms of knowledge. So this is another condition. We have to try to correct that problem where we think we know everything. Okay. So still with verse 3, the next condition, if we can call it that, is a little more complicated. So believe in the unseen and yukimun al-swalat. Okay, so this is like mutakin is some terms that are very important in the Quran and hard to translate. The standard translation is establish prayer. A lot of people will add the word regular before prayer, so establish regular prayer. So they would translate swalat as prayer, yukimun as established. Well, here again, I'm going to try to propose a more literal translation. Yukimun fairly uncontroversially has to do with the word stand. Okay, so we could translate this as stand, those who stand. But we can also think about the metaphorical meaning of stand, which would of course mean to stay, to not change, to not, or to spend a long time in a certain position. So for instance, at the beginning of the next surah, Al-Imran, God is described as Al-Qayyum, which again literally would be, I think, the standing, but more metaphorically would mean the one who does not change, who is always there, cannot be toppled. Or some people would translate it to as the self-subsisting. I mean, he stands without having to be propped against anything else. So both of those could be valid interpretations. So to say yukimun, or in the command form elsewhere in the Quran, I'll say akimu, can mean stand or stay, implying to a certain persistence, stability, non-wavering. But then the word swalat, even more controversial. Well, there's at least one non-controversial definition of swalat in Arabic, which is still valid in modern day Arabic, as I understand it, which is communication or contact. So it could be God is saying stand or stay in contact, stay in touch. And just like with mutakin, where we wasn't sure what it is we're defending from, or at least it's not specified what you're defending from, here too it doesn't specify the thing with which you are supposed to stay in contact. Although again, the implication would seem fairly obvious that it would be with God. So this, we could say this is saying it's a guidance for those who defend, who believe in the unseen, and who stay in touch with God, who do not turn away from God, who are trying to receive communication from God. Again, you can see why that would be logical, because this book, of course, is a message from God to humans. Who will it be a guidance for? For those who are keeping in a state of contact with God, or continually trying to receive guidance, instruction from God. So we have the term in education, we have the term teachable. So those who are teachable, this book will teach them. Muhammad is said before the revelation of the Qur'an was supposed to have gone off to caves and prayed. And of course there was no Qur'an at this point, so there weren't instructions on how to pray, at least not from that means. But evidently he was someone who was trying to make contact with God. So he would of course satisfy that condition. And you can see then how this opens up the meaning much wider than saying those who establish regular prayer. It seems like that would be limiting this Quran to people who are already Muslims, in the sense that most people interpret the word Muslim to be someone who follows the 5 pillars of Islam. It seems to be putting the cart before the horse. And also assuming that we even know, before we've really read the Quran, what Islam is. That it has to do with praying 5 times a day, for instance. Well, it doesn't say here pray 5 times a day. Supposedly it says that later, although we can look at verses and talk about whether that's exactly what it's saying or not. But in any case, I think we should stick with the literal. So far, we'll say it says stand or stay in contact. And then this is all still in the same verse. So arguably this third verse has 3 requirements in it. So we already did believe in the unseen, stay in contact, and then from what we have provided them they spend. And we, of course, would be God, speaking in the first person plural, kind of the royal we. So what does this mean? From what we have provided them we spend. Of course, that word provided, or rizq, provision, is another big term in the Quran. Um, and in this context, though, I think that we have to think about it in a broader sense. Again, this is not just talking about giving charity, giving alms, but more generally, whatever God has provided them, they use that provision to spend. So the broadest interpretation here could be that they make use of. It doesn't necessarily say give in charity, because some of what God has given us is not a material thing that can be shared. But if we think about things like intellect, or even things like time, or resources of any kind, that they make use of those resources. They don't just let them go to waste. So again, a very open-ended, it seems to me, condition. Okay, and then verse 4, these conditions, it seems to me, are getting more specific. And those who believe, so I already said believe in the unseen, but now it gets more specific. Believe in what is sent down to you and what was sent down before you. So the you here, of course, is usually considered to be Muhammad. So, which makes sense. It's the present revelation. So they believe in the content of the present revelation, meaning the Quran, and also in what was sent down before you, so past revelations. So this is saying that there has to be belief in a line or a tradition of messages from God in order for this book to have to guide. And in the hereafter, they firmly believe, or they are certain, yuqinun. So, again, getting somewhat more specific, that they believe that firmly that the material existence of this life is not the end of existence, but it will be followed by something after. In verse 5, those, meaning all the people who fulfill all of those conditions, which by my count is 5 conditions, those are on a guidance from their Lord. So again, the word guidance, or hudan. And those, they are the successful ones. So we have a description here. This is kind of a summing up verse, it seems, of the special class of people for whom the Quran is a guidance. And in this last verse, and by last I mean the last in this passage, it's saying that these people are will not only receive guidance, but they are on or upon a guidance from their Lord, which I take to mean that their lives are, in a sense, founded upon the instructions, the guidance that they've received from God. It's not founded upon anything less reliable. And for this reason, they are the successful. That's what success is defined as. So that's the first 5 verses. After those first 5 verses, there's a fairly lengthy description of a very different class of people who are called the kafirin, That's another major term. So I'll just start on that. I have a little more time. Inna aladina kafaru. Indeed, those who kafaru, we have to talk about what that term means. Sawawun aleihim a anzartuhum am lam tunzirhum. It is the same for them whether you warn them or not you warn them. La yu'minun. Not they believe. In the next verse, Khatama Allahu ala qulubihim. God has set a seal on their hearts. Wa ala sama'ahim. And on their hearing. Wa ala abswarahim. And on their vision, reshawatun, is a veil. Wa lahum azabun azimun. And for them is a punishment great. So, again, that's just the beginning of a lengthy description of this other class of people, the kafirin. So what does kafaru mean? Again, the traditional translation is disbelieve. So kafirin would be the disbelievers. But the more literal translation, so the literal translation, this word comes, interestingly, from agriculture and would refer to the sowing of seeds, the planting of seeds, which of course would involve covering the seed with soil, burying the seed in dirt, which of course in farming is the right thing to do, but when applied to this context, arguably what it means is covering up, burying, hiding the truth, the message from God. So this is, I think, a preferable translation, certainly a more literal translation of this major term kafirin. That's the noun form, the group of people who kafaru, the verb form, who cover up. It is awkward to translate this in English because, as so often it seems in Arabic, the object of the verb is not specified. So just like when it says al-muttaqin, those who defend, it doesn't say defend from what. But that's true even with, to go back to itaku and muttaqin, the Quran will often say itaku. So even if you just translate that in the conventional way as fear, well, it doesn't make much sense without saying itaku Allah, fear God. So I think that's just a quality of Arabic. The awkwardness is part of just the natural awkwardness of translating from one language to a very different one. So I don't think that should really give us too much pause. So to say, inna aladina kafaru, indeed those who cover up, and not say what they're covering up, that might seem much more awkward than saying, indeed those who disbelieve. Because when you say disbelieve, you don't need an object in English. But I think in Arabic, you don't need an object for kafaru, even if by kafaru you mean cover up. And again, what they're covering up is so broad that it makes sense not to always specify. But there are certainly plenty of verses where it does have an object, where it will say kafaru biayati Allahi, the verses or signs of God. So provisionally, I think, cover up is a good translation. And it's certainly in this context, when we've just heard that this book is a guidance for those who not only are open to receiving communication from God, but are standing in communication with God or standing in contact with Him. Look, just as Muhammad did, as I said, going off to this cave and secluding himself, he's there before he's receiving revelation, just waiting patiently, hoping to receive some kind of communication. And then when it has been received, as verse 5 says, those who are on a guidance, so then not just receiving it, not just talking about it, but actually basing their whole lives on that guidance. So, of course, the polar opposite of that would be someone who, when the message comes to him or her, buries it in the dust, covers it up, mixes it with falsehood, and therefore conceals it, covers it up, so that it can't be really seen as for what it is. So for these people, it is the same whether you warn them or you do not warn them. They do not believe. So it's an early warning, and there's many of them in the Qur'an, that you can have no impact on this class of people, because they receive the message and they cover it up. It's not that they don't receive it, it's what they choose to do with it when they receive it. So your warning them is completely, it's not saying don't warn them, but it's saying it will not have an impact on them. And then verse 7 explains in some detail why that is. And again, remember, this is a book, no doubt in it, meaning we have to take this literally as far as that's possible. God has set a seal on their hearts and on their hearing, and on their vision is a veil. So what would it mean to take that literally? Well, literally doesn't necessarily mean interpreting everything in a material or physical dimension. Because obviously the word heart is not referring to the physical heart, the organ, the heart. And so the seal that God has placed on their hearts, while I don't think that's a metaphor, it's not a physical ailment, but it's saying that He has made it so that they cannot feel what apparently it's necessary for them to feel about God, about other humans. And likewise with their hearing, it's not a physical defect that means they cannot hear the message, but when the message is spoken to them, it does not register in their minds so that they can learn from it. There's a seal over their hearing. And as for their vision, there's a veil over their vision so that they see, but they do not see meaning. So we have endless debates and very heated debates all throughout our culture, which are much more visible now that our culture has become sort of digitized. We have social media, about nature and the origins of nature, whether those origins are divine or material, or just whether nature comes from God or comes from itself somehow, or from nothing. And what those debates seem to center upon is a disagreement about the meaning of the things that we can all see with our eyes. And what God is saying here is that there is an inability for a large number of people to see the meaning of the physical creation. So we cannot, and again, this is a warning that we cannot correct that, certainly not with words or in any other way, because there's a veil on the vision of those who cover up the truth from God. And for them is a great punishment. So this is, I think, the first reference, at least in this surah, to the punishment that awaits those who cover up the truth. So I'll just end on that note. And it seems worthwhile to point out that there's no getting around the presence and central presence of punishment, of hell, that it promises for those who cover up the truth, those who turn away from God, those who challenge the very idea of God. It's certainly one of the most controversial aspects of the Qur'an, and it stares us in the face whenever we open the Qur'an, and that's something that we have to reckon with, and we can't sweep it under the rug, which, if you think about it, would be something that the kafirin do. So it's certainly a warning to those of us who have connections in the secular community, or perhaps with Christians, Jews, anyone who does not believe in the Quran, that it's an awkward situation. We cannot honestly tell a Christian, a Jew, a Buddhist, a Hindu, an atheist, an agnostic, we cannot tell them, you're going to go to heaven because you're a good person. Of course, what might make it a little less awkward is that we also can't tell them that I'm going to go to heaven, because the Quran does not say, based on your religious identification, you will go to heaven or you will go to hell. It says you must satisfy these criteria. And as we're going to see, they're very demanding criteria, and I don't think anyone can confidently say that they satisfy those criteria. And when we read about the different prophets in the Quran, including Muhammad, they get reprimanded. So they too are never really guaranteed a spot in heaven, or guaranteed protection against hell. So that might smooth over the awkwardness, but this is not merely, the Quran is not merely offering guidance as something helpful or something interesting. It's very straightforwardly saying from the start that this is a life and death, and more than life and death, question, that how we will respond to this message will determine whether we are punished or rewarded in the afterlife. Now, I will also, as that verse 4 already indicated, it doesn't exactly insist that how we respond to the Quran specifically will determine whether we're rewarded or punished in the afterlife. In fact, it's actually insisting that we accept not only the Quran, but prior revelations, although what that means is a big question. But the message from God generally, and again, what that is, we have to talk about, but how we respond to that message generally, it's saying will determine whether we're punished or rewarded in the afterlife. So there's not a lot of wiggle room for saying, you could maybe say that this book, maybe your life and your soul did not depend on this particular book, the Quran, but you do have to say that your life and your soul depend on the contents of this book, the general message of this book. It's sort of non-negotiable. Okay, well, I'll leave it at that.